These letters, and those that follow, make up the last of Lenin's works which are equivalent to an outline program for the future of the Soviet government. In these letters Lenin emphasizes the need to make changes to the Soviet government and warns of potentially disastrous consequences if the necessary but difficult steps are not taken. These works offer Lenin's early and incredibly insightful critique of the Soviet government, and critique some of its members, Stalin in particular. The present work was not published until 1956, repressed by Stalin until his death, first published 3 decades after they were written. Letter to the Congress. 1. I would urge strongly that at this Congress a number of changes be made in our political structure. I want to tell you of the considerations to which I attach most importance. At the head of the list I set an increase in the number of Central Committee members to a few dozen or even 100. It is my opinion that without this reform our Central Committee would be in great danger if the course of events were not quite favorable for us, and that is something we cannot count on. Then, I intend to propose that the Congress should on certain conditions invest the decisions of the State Planning Commission with legislative force, meeting, in this respect, the wishes of Comrade Trotsky, to a certain extent and on certain conditions. As for the first point, i.e., increasing the number of CC members, I think it must be done in order to raise the prestige of the Central Committee, to do a thorough job of improving our administrative machinery and to prevent conflicts between small sections of the CC from acquiring excessive importance for the future of the party. It seems to me that our party has every right to demand from the working class 50 to 100 CC members, and that it could get them from it without unduly taxing the resources of that class. Such a reform would considerably increase the stability of our party and ease its struggle in the encirclement of hostile states, which, in my opinion, is likely to, and must, become much more acute in the next few years. I think that the stability of our party would gain 1,000-fold by such measure. Lenin. December 23, 1922. Taken down by M.V. 2. Continuation of the notes. December 24, 1922. By stability of the Central Committee, of which I spoke above, I mean measure against a split, as far as such measures can at all be taken. For, of course, the White Guard in Russkaya MYSL, it seems to have been SS Oldenburg, was right when, first, in the White Guard's game against Soviet Russia he banked on a split in our party, and when, secondly, he banked on grave differences in our party to cause that split. Our party relies on 2 classes and therefore its instability would be possible and its downfall inevitable if there were no agreement between those 2 classes. In that event this or that measure, and generally all talk about the stability of our CC, would be futile. No measure of any kind could prevent a split in such a case. But I hope that this is too remote a future and too improbable an event to talk about. I have in mind stability as a guarantee against a split in the immediate future, and I intend to deal here with a few ideas concerning personal qualities. I think that from this standpoint the prime factors in the question of stability are such members of the CC as Stalin and Trotsky. I think relations between them make up the greater part of the danger of a split, which could be avoided, and this purpose, in my opinion, would be served, among other things, by increasing the number of CC members to 50 or 100. Comrade Stalin, having become Secretary General, has unlimited authority concentrated in his hands, and I am not sure whether he will always be capable of using that authority with sufficient caution. Comrade Trotsky, on the other hand, as his struggle against the CC on the question of the People's Commissariat of Communications has already proved, is distinguished not only by outstanding ability. He is personally perhaps the most capable man in the present CC, but he has displayed excessive self-assurance and shown excessive preoccupation with the purely administrative side of the work. These 2 qualities of the 2 outstanding leaders of the present CC can inadvertently lead to a split, and if our party does not take steps to avert this, the split may come unexpectedly. I shall not give any further appraisals of the personal qualities of other members of the CC. I shall just recall that the October episode with Zinoviev and Kamenev, see volume 26, pages 216-19, was, of course, no accident, but neither can the blame for it be laid upon them personally, any more than non-Bolshevism can upon Trotsky. Speaking of the young CC members, I wish to say a few words about Bukharin and Pyatakov. They are, in my opinion, the most outstanding figures, among the youngest ones, and the following must be borne in mind about them. Bukharin is not only a most valuable and major theorist of the party, he is also rightly considered the favorite of the whole party, but his theoretical views can be classified as fully Marxist only with great reserve, for there is something scholastic about him. He has never made a study of the dialectics, and, I think, never fully understood it. December 25. As for Pyatakov, he is unquestionably a man of outstanding will and outstanding ability, but shows too much zeal for administrating and the administrative side of the work to be relied upon in a serious political matter. Both of these remarks, of course, are made only for the present, on the assumption that both these outstanding and devoted party workers fail to find an occasion to enhance their knowledge and amend their one-sidedness. Lenin. December 25, 1922. Taken down by M.V. Addition to the above letter. Stalin is too rude, and this defect, although quite tolerable in our midst and in dealing among us communists, becomes intolerable in a Secretary-General. That is why I suggest that the comrades think about a way of removing Stalin from that post and appointing another man in his stead who in all other respects differs from Comrade Stalin in having only one advantage, namely, that of being more tolerant, more loyal, more polite and more considerate to the comrades, less capricious, etc. This circumstance may appear to be a negligible detail. But I think that from the standpoint of safeguards against a split and from the standpoint of what I wrote above about the relationship between Stalin and Trotsky, it is not a minor detail, but it is a detail which can assume decisive importance. Lenin. Taken down by L.F. January 4, 1923. 3. Continuation of the notes. December 26, 1922. The increase in the number of CC members to 50 or even 100 must, in my opinion, serve a double or even a treble purpose. The more members there are in the CC, the more men will be trained in CC work and the less danger there will be of a split due to some indiscretion. The enlistment of many workers to the CC will help the workers to improve our administrative machinery, which is pretty bad. We inherited it, in effect, for the old regime, for it was absolutely impossible to reorganize it in such a short time, especially in conditions of war, famine, etc. That is why those critics who point to the defects of our administrative machinery out of mockery or malice may be calmly answered that they do not in the least understand the conditions of the revolution today. It is altogether impossible in 5 years to reorganize the machinery adequately, especially in the conditions in which our revolution took place. It is enough that in 5 years we have created a new type of state in which the workers are leading the peasants against the bourgeoisie, and in a hostile international environment this in itself is a gigantic achievement. But knowledge of this must on no account blind us to the fact that, in effect, we took over the old machinery of state from the Tsar and the bourgeoisie, and that now, with the onset of peace and the satisfaction of the minimum requirements against famine, all our work must be directed towards improving the administrative machinery. I think that a few dozen workers, being members of the CC, can deal better than anybody else with checking, improving and remodeling our state apparatus. The workers' and peasants' inspection on whom this function devolved at the beginning proved unable to cope with it and can be used only as an appendage or, on certain conditions, as an assistant to these members of the CC. In my opinion, the workers admitted to the Central Committee should come preferably not form among those who have had long service in Soviet bodies. In this part of my letter the term workers everywhere includes peasants, because those workers have already acquired the very traditions and the very prejudices which it is desirable to combat. The working-class members of the CC must be mainly workers of a lower stratum than those promoted in the last 5 years to work in Soviet bodies. They must be people closer to being rank-and-file workers and peasants, who, however, do not fall into the category of direct or indirect exploiters. I think that by attending all sittings of the CC and all sittings of the Political Bureau, and by reading all the documents of the CC, such workers can form a staff of devoted supporters of the Soviet system, able, first, to give stability to the CC itself, and second, to work effectively on the renewal and improvement of the state apparatus. Lenin. Taken down by L.F. December 26, 1922. 7. Continuation of the notes. December 29, 1922. In increasing the number of its members, the CC, I think, must also, and perhaps mainly, devote attention to checking and improving our administrative machinery, which is no good at all. For this we must enlist the services of highly qualified specialists, and the task of supplying those specialists must devolve upon the workers' and peasants' inspection. How are we to combine these checking specialists, people with adequate knowledge, and the new members of the CC? This problem must be resolved in practice. It seems to me that the workers' and peasants' inspection, as a result of its development and of our perplexity about its development, has led all in all to what we now observe, namely, to an intermediate position between a special people's commissariat and a special function of the members of the CC, between an institution that inspects anything and everything and an aggregate of not very numerous but first-class inspectors, who must be well paid. This is especially indispensable in our age, when everything must be paid for and inspectors are directly employed by the institutions that pay them better. If the number of CC members is increased in the appropriate way, and they go through a course of state management year after year with the help of highly qualified specialists and of members of the workers' and peasants' inspection who are highly authoritative in every branch, then, I think, we shall successfully solve this problem which we have not managed to do for such a long time. To sum up, 100 members of the CC at the most and not more than 400 to 500 assistants, members of the workers' and peasants' inspection, engaged in inspecting under their direction. Lenin. December 29, 1922. Taken down by M.V. Granting legislative functions to the State Planning Commission. 4. Continuation of the notes. December 27, 1922. This idea was suggested by Comrade Trotsky, it seems, quite a long time ago. I was against it at the time, because I thought that there would then be a fundamental lack of coordination in the system of our legislative institutions. But after closer consideration of the matter I find that in substance there is a sound idea in it, namely, the State Planning Commission stands somewhat apart from our legislative institutions, although, as a body of experienced people, experts, representatives of science and technology, it is actually in a better position to form a correct judgment of affairs. However, we have so far proceeded from the principle that the State Planning Commission must provide the state with critically analyzed material and the state institutions must decide state matters. I think that in the present situation, when affairs of state have become unusually complicated, when it is necessary time and again to settle questions of which some require the expert opinion of the members of the State Planning Commission and some do not, and, what is more, to settle matters which need the expert opinion of the State Planning Commission on some points but not on others, I think that we must now take a step towards extending the competence of the State Planning Commission. I imagine that step to be such that the decisions of the State Planning Commission could not be rejected by ordinary procedure in Soviet bodies, but would need a special procedure to be reconsidered. For example, the question should be submitted to a session of the All-Russia Central Executive Committee, prepared for reconsideration according to a special instruction, involving the drawing up, under special rules, of memoranda to examine whether the State Planning Commission decision is subject to reversal. Lastly, special time limits should be set for the reconsideration of State Planning Commission decisions, etc. In this respect I think we can and must accede to the wishes of Comrade Trotsky, but not in the sense that specifically any one of our political leaders, or the chairman of the Supreme Economic Council, etc., should be chairman of the State Planning Commission. I think that personal matters are at present too closely interwoven with the question of principle. I think that the attacks which are now made against the chairman of the State Planning Commission, Comrade Krutsazanovsky, and Comrade Pyatakov, his deputy, and which proceed along two lines, so that, on the one hand, we hear charges of extreme leniency, lack of independent judgment and lack of backbone, and, on the other, charges of excessive coarseness, drill sergeant methods, lack of solid scientific background, etc. I think these attacks express two sides of the question, exaggerating them to the extreme, and that in actual fact we need a skillful combination in the State Planning Commission of two types of character, of which one may be exemplified by Comrade Pyatakov and the other by Comrade Krutsazanovsky. I think that the State Planning Commission must be headed by a man who, on the one hand, has scientific education, namely, either technical or agronomic, with decades of experience in practical work in the field of technology or of agronomics. I think this man must possess not so much the qualities of an administrator as broad experience and the ability to enlist the services of other men. Lenin. December 27, 1922. Taken down by M.V. 5. December 28, 1922. I have noticed that some of our comrades who are able to exercise a decisive influence on the direction of state affairs, exaggerate the administrative side, which, of course, is necessary in its time and place, but which should not be confused with the scientific side, with a grasp of the broad facts, the ability to recruit men, etc. In every state institution, especially in the State Planning Commission, the combination of these two qualities is essential, and when Comrade Krutsazanovsky told me that he had enlisted the services of Comrade Pyatakov for the commission and had come to terms with him about the work, I, in consenting to this, on the one hand, entertained certain doubts and, on the other, sometimes hoped that we would thus get the combination of the two types of statesmen. To see whether those hopes are justified, we must now wait and consider the matter on the strength of somewhat longer experience, but in principle, I think, there can be no doubt that such a combination of temperaments and types, of men and qualities, is absolutely necessary for the correct functioning of state institutions. I think that here it is just as harmful to exaggerate administrating, as it is to exaggerate anything at all. The chief of a state institution must possess a high degree of personal appeal and sufficiently solid scientific and technical knowledge to be able to check people's work. That much is basic. Without it the work cannot be done properly. On the other hand, it is very important that he should be capable of administering and should have a worthy assistant, or assistants, in the matter. The combination of these two qualities in one person will hardly be found, and it is hardly necessary. Lenin. Taken down by L.F. December 28, 1922. 6. December 29, 1922. The State Planning Commission is apparently developing in all respects into a commission of experts. Such an institution cannot be headed by anybody except a man with great experience and an all-round scientific education in technology. The administrative element must in essence be subsidiary. A certain independence and autonomy of the State Planning Commission is essential for the prestige of this scientific institution and depends on one thing, namely, the conscientiousness of its workers and their conscientious desire to turn our plan of economic and social development into reality. This last quality may, of course, be found now only as an exception, for the overwhelming majority of scientists, who naturally make up the Commission, are inevitably infected with bourgeois ideas and bourgeois prejudices. The check on them from this standpoint must be the job of several persons who can form the presidium of the Commission. These must be communists to keep a day-to-day check on the extent of the bourgeois scientists' devotion to our cause displayed in the whole course of the work and see that they abandon bourgeois prejudices and gradually adopt the socialist standpoint. This work along the twin lines of scientific checking and pure administration should be the ideal of those who run the State Planning Commission in our republic. Lenin. Taken down by M.V. December 29, 1922. Is it rational to divide the work of the State Planning Commission into separate jobs? Should we not, on the contrary, try to build up a group of permanent specialists who would be systematically checked by the presidium of the Commission and could solve the whole range of problems within its ambit? I think that the latter would be the more reasonable and that we must try to cut down the number of temporary and urgent tasks. Lenin. December 29, 1922. Taken down by M.V. The question of nationalities or autonomization. I suppose I have been very remiss with respect to the workers of Russia for not having intervened energetically and decisively enough in the notorious question of autonomization, which, it appears, is officially called the question of the Soviet Socialist Republics. When this question arose last summer, I was ill. And then in autumn I relied too much on my recovery and on the October and December plenary meetings giving me an opportunity of intervening in this question. However, I did not manage to attend the October plenary meeting, when this question came up, or the one in December, and so the question passed me by almost completely. I have only had time for a talk with Comrade Dzerzhinsky, who came from the Caucasus and told me how this matter stood in Georgia. I have also managed to exchange a few words with Comrade Zinoviev and express my apprehensions on this matter. From what I was told by Comrade Dzerzhinsky, who was at the head of the commission sent by the CC to investigate the Georgian incident, I could only draw the greatest apprehensions. If matters had come to such a pass that Ordzhonikidze could go to the extreme of applying physical violence, as Comrade Dzerzhinsky informed me, we can imagine what a mess we have got ourselves into. Obviously the whole business of autonomization was radically wrong and badly timed. It is said that a united apparatus was needed. Where did that assurance come from? Did it not come from that same Russian apparatus which, as I pointed out in one of the preceding sections of my diary, we took over from Tsarism and slightly anointed with Soviet oil? There is no doubt that that measure should have been delayed somewhat until we could say that we vouched for our apparatus as our own. But now, we must, in all conscience, admit the contrary. The apparatus we call ours is, in fact, still quite alien to us. It is a bourgeois and czarist hodgepodge, and there has been no possibility of getting rid of it in the course of the past 5 years without the help of other countries, and because we have been busy most of the time with military engagements and the fight against famine. It is quite natural that in such circumstances the freedom to secede from the Union, by which we justify ourselves, will be a mere scrap of paper, unable to defend the non-Russians from the onslaught of that really Russian man, the great Russian chauvinist, in substance a rascal and a tyrant, such as the typical Russian bureaucrat is. There is no doubt that the infinitesimal percentage of Soviet and Sovietized workers will drown in that tide of chauvinistic great Russian riffraff like a fly in milk. It is said in defense of this measure that the People's Commissariats directly concerned with national psychology and national education were set up as separate bodies. But there the question arises, can these People's Commissariats be made quite independent? And secondly, were we careful enough to take measures to provide the non-Russians with a real safeguard against the truly Russian bully? I do not think we took such measures, although we could and should have done so. I think that Stalin's haste and his infatuation with pure administration, together with his spite against the notorious nationalist socialism, Stalin criticized the minority nations for not being internationalist, because they did want to unite with Russia, played a fatal role here. In politics, spite generally plays the basest of roles. I also fear that Comrade Dzerzhinsky, who went to the Caucasus to investigate the crime of those nationalist socialists, distinguished himself there by his truly Russian frame of mind. It is common knowledge that people of other nationalities who have become Russified overdo this Russian frame of mind, and that the impartiality of his whole commission was typified well enough by Ordzhonikidze's manhandling. I think that no provocation or even insult can justify such Russian manhandling, and that Comrade Dzerzhinsky was inexcusably guilty in adopting a light-hearted attitude towards it. For all the citizens in the Caucasus, Ordzhonikidze was the authority. Ordzhonikidze had no right to display that irritability to which he and Dzerzhinsky referred. On the contrary, Ordzhonikidze should have behaved with a restraint which cannot be demanded of any ordinary citizen, still less of a man accused of a political crime. And, to tell the truth, those nationalist socialists were citizens who were accused of a political crime, and the terms of the accusation were such that it could not be described otherwise. Here we have an important question of principle: how is internationalism to be understood? Lenin. December 30, 1922. Taken down by M.V. Continuation of the notes. December 31, 1922. In my writings on the national question, I have already said that an abstract presentation of the question of nationalism in general is of no use at all. A distinction must necessarily be made between the nationalism of an oppressor nation and that of an oppressed nation, the nationalism of a big nation and that of a small nation. In respect of the second kind of nationalism, we, nationals of a big nation, have nearly always been guilty, in historic practice, of an infinite number of cases of violence. Furthermore, we commit violence and insult an infinite number of times without noticing it. It is sufficient to recall my vulgar reminiscences of how non-Russians are treated, how the Poles are not called by any other name than Polyachiska, how the Tatar is nicknamed Prince, how the Ukrainians are always cockholes and the Georgians and other Caucasian nationals always Caucasians. That is why internationalism on the part of oppressors or great nations, as they are called, though they are great only in their violence, only great as bullies, must consist not only in the observance of the formal equality of nations but even in an inequality of the oppressor nation, the great nation, that must make up for the inequality which obtains in actual practice. Anybody who does not understand this has not grasped the real proletarian attitude to the national question. He is still essentially petty bourgeois in his point of view and is, therefore, sure to descend to the bourgeois point of view. What is important for the proletarian? For the proletarian it is not only important, it is absolutely essential that he should be assured that the non-Russians place the greatest possible trust in the proletarian class struggle. What is needed to ensure this? Not merely formal equality. In one way or another, by one's attitude or by concessions, it is necessary to compensate the non-Russian for the lack of trust, for the suspicion and the insults to which the government of the dominant nation subjected them in the past. I think it is unnecessary to explain this to Bolsheviks, to Communists, in greater detail. And I think that in the present instance, as far as the Georgian nation is concerned, we have a typical case in which a genuinely proletarian attitude makes profound caution, thoughtfulness and a readiness to compromise a matter of necessity for us. The Georgian, Stalin, who is neglectful of this aspect of the question, or who carelessly flings about accusations of nationalist socialism, whereas he himself is a real and true nationalist socialist, and even a vulgar Great Russian bully, violates, in substance, the interests of proletarian class solidarity. For nothing holds up the development and strengthening of proletarian class solidarity so much as national injustice. Offended nationals are not sensitive to anything so much as to the feeling of equality and the violation of this equality, if only through negligence or jest, to the violation of that equality by their proletarian comrades. That is why in this case it is better to overdo rather than underdo the concessions and leniency towards the national minorities. That is why, in this case, the fundamental interest of proletarian class struggle requires that we never adopt a formal attitude to the national question, but always take into account the specific attitude of the proletarian of the oppressed, or small, nation towards the oppressor, or great, nation. Lenin. Taken down by M.V. December 31, 1922. Continuation of the notes. December 31, 1922. What practical measures must be taken in the present situation? Firstly, we must maintain and strengthen the union of socialist republics. Of this there can be no doubt. This measure is necessary for us and it is necessary for the world communist proletariat in its struggle against the world bourgeoisie and its defense against bourgeois intrigues. Secondly, the union of socialist republics must be retained for its diplomatic apparatus. By the way, this apparatus is an exceptional component of our state apparatus. We have not allowed a single influential person from the old Tsarist apparatus into it. All sections with any authority are composed of communists. That is why it has already won for itself, this may be said boldly, the name of a reliable communist apparatus purged to an incomparably greater extent of the old Tsarist, bourgeois and petty bourgeois elements than that which we have had to make do with in other people's commissariats. Thirdly, exemplary punishment must be inflicted on Comrade Orjonikidze. I say this all the more regretfully as I am one of his personal friends and have worked with him abroad, and the investigation of all the material which Dzerzhinsky's commission has collected must be completed or started over again to correct the enormous mass of wrongs and biased judgments which it doubtlessly contains. The political responsibility for all this truly great Russian nationalist campaign must, of course, be laid on Stalin and Dzerzhinsky. Fourthly, the strictest rules must be introduced on the use of the national language in the non-Russian republics of our Union, and these rules must be checked with special care. There is no doubt that our apparatus being what it is, there is bound to be, on the pretext of unity in the railway service, unity in the fiscal service and so on, a mass of truly Russian abuses. Special ingenuity is necessary for the struggle against these abuses, not to mention special sincerity on the part of those who undertake this struggle. A detailed code will be required, and only the nationals living in the republic in question can draw it up at all successfully. And then we cannot be sure in advance that as a result of this work we shall not take a step backward at our next Congress of Soviets, i.e., retain the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics only for military and diplomatic affairs, and in all other respects restore full independence to the individual people's commissariats. It must be borne in mind that the decentralization of the people's commissariats and the lack of coordination in their work as far as Moscow and other centers are concerned can be compensated sufficiently by party authority, if it is exercised with sufficient prudence and impartiality. The harm that can result to our state from a lack of unification between the national apparatuses and the Russian apparatus is infinitely less than that which will be done not only to us, but to the whole international, and to the hundreds of millions of the peoples of Asia, which is destined to follow us on to the stage of history in the near future. It would be unpardonable opportunism if, on the eve of debut of the East, just as it is awakening, we undermined our prestige with its peoples, even if only by the slightest crudity or injustice towards our own non-Russian nationalities. The need to rally against the imperialists of the West, who are defending the capitalist world, is one thing. There can be no doubt about that, and it would be superfluous for me to speak about my unconditional approval of it. It is another thing when we ourselves lapse, even if only in trifles, into imperialist attitudes towards oppressed nationalities, thus undermining all our principled sincerity, all our principled defense of the struggle against imperialism. But the morrow of world history will be a day when the awakening peoples oppressed by imperialism are finally aroused and the decisive long and hard struggle for their liberation begins. Lenin. December 31, 1922. Taken down by M.V.